Yo, where the fuck you been at, man?
Yeah, shoot.
Shit. Again with this. So like, where you been at? Like, what's your YouTube channel looking like? Where you been at? Like, I ain't seen you.
Instagram.
Y'all know what it is, Clique David, the Pink Clique Prime Minister, and we are back to bringing you the most poppin' poetry podcast the culture has to offer. Pen Clique, we out here. And we have missed y'all during our year-long hiatus. And during that time, we took a hard look at what we did during season 1 to identify where we can improve, what we can cut out, and what we needed to upgrade. But don't get me wrong, we are proud of what we accomplished in season 1. We legit made a poetry podcast with a video component. It was quick, it was dirty, and it was a hell of a learning experience. So before we get into the studio build, let me first show y'all how we used to do things and how that would inform our studio building decisions. By the way, you can find links to all the gear mentioned in the video description. In season 1, we recorded our podcast wherever we needed to be. Sometimes we recorded at my apartment, sometimes at Daniel's, and other times we would go to our guest places as well. What was dope about that was that visually, every guest video had a different look and vibe. Particularly great when the guest had a cool looking space like Lady B's children's playroom or lyrically twisted studio space, the dope spot. But at the same time, setup and teardown at each place was a huge hassle. We'd get to their place, spend time figuring out where would be the best place to shoot, try to light the space as best as we could, and what we got was a bit of a mixed bag. Like in Myron Wood's episode, we could only film at his dining table, which was flooded with too much natural light, and compositionally, it just wasn't the best look. At my apartment, we had to sit tightly next to each other because I don't have the space to bring back the camera any further, and even then the crop was tighter than I would have liked. Shooting in various places could also affect audio quality because of the varying room acoustics of the different spaces we recorded at. But fortunately, as we were using cheaper dynamic mics, we actually dodged a lot of these issues simply because the microphones weren't sensitive enough to pick those finer details. However, there certainly was a muddiness to our vocals that could be noticed if you were listening to the audio-only podcast. So while we were a mobile podcast that could set up anywhere and everywhere, we realized that for the sake of consistent audio and video quality, we needed a designated recording space where we could have better control over all the variables: lighting, acoustics, composition, and audio quality. Last year, my podcast partner Daniel Hees and his lovely wife were able to move into a house, and one of the first ideas that sprang up was to renovate the garage into a proper recording space. A place where we can control the lights and acoustics with enough space to facilitate both video and photography shoots. The garage was pretty bare bones, exposed wires and wood beams everywhere, so first step was to install drywall. Once that was up, we decided to paint the walls a neutral mid-tone gray. We figured that if the walls were just white, it might reflect more light than we would want for video and photo. And if the walls were painted black, they'd absorb too much light, making the shot too dark. Thus, we picked a mid-tone gray to not only be neutral with the light bounce, but also the gray wouldn't introduce any unwanted color into the scene. Now that we had a space with neutral gray walls, we did an initial test shoot with the lighting equipment that we had at the time. Throughout season 1, all we used were these inexpensive clip-on shop lights from Home Depot using photography bulbs. They got the job done for what we were doing in season 1, but for season 2, I wanted to use colored lights as an inexpensive way to change the look of our space, so each episode would have a slightly different aesthetic, and all we would have to do is change the gels on the lights. During the test shoot, I quickly found out that using the shop lights wasn't giving me enough control over the light intensity, or even the direction of the lights because the shop lights don't have barn doors. I realized that I was gonna need to use a different lighting setup to dial things in. But on the plus side, the gels did a great job in the test shoot to quickly change up the look and vibe between shots, so that was a win for a proof of concept. The solution to all this was to buy these newer adjustable LED panel lights. They're bright, dimmable, compact, came with barn doors, and were a great value for the price. By using a soft overhead key light, we can use the colored lights on the sides to both give us a colored rim light as well as flood the back walls, filling the room with color. Plus, the front of my laptop doesn't catch light like a big reflector dish. Throughout season 1, we didn't always have a table to sit around, but we realized we definitely needed one to hold up a laptop for the poetry review segment that we can all reach and see. And plus, a table just makes everything look legit. It was important that whichever table we chose, it would allow for all 3 subjects to be shown in frame facing the camera. Luckily, Daniel's uncle works well with his hands and was able to build us one based off of a sketch I drew up. And since he built it from scratch, we were able to save money and have it built to an appropriate size for our space. Each subject would sit along the round sides so we're all semi-facing each other and the camera, and the flat edge of the table points towards the camera. We threw a black tablecloth on top of it to prevent any additional light reflection from the overhead key light, and it's worked out pretty great so far. We also ordered a few stools for us to sit on. It was super important that the stools were height adjustable so we can ensure that no matter how tall or short our guest was, we can adjust their seating height so that all of our heads are level on camera, making for a much cleaner composition. The most obvious upgrade for any podcast would of course be the microphones. So one day I surprised Daniel with an Audio-Technica AT2020 for his birthday, which pretty much led to him picking up a couple more of the same mic. And now that the Clique boys got that crystal clear clarity with our sensitive condenser mics, with great mics comes another great responsibility. Now, the room acoustics actually matter. During our first test run in the new garage studio, we noticed that we were getting some muddy mid-ranges and a little slap echo here and there. It probably doesn't help that we're recording in what's essentially a concrete and drywall box with nothing on the walls. To fix that up, we put down some scrap carpet pieces on the floor and hung moving blankets to the sides of us to absorb some of those bass reflections. It gets the job done. At the end of the day, it's better to have content out in the world than to be held up by polish and detail. That being said, we are done with all the pre-production and polishing that we can handle for now and are ready to release season 2 of the new and improved most poppin' poetry podcast in the galaxy, Pen Clique. We'll be relaunching on July 10th. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube or to our audio podcast on any of your favorite platforms, and we cannot wait to present to y'all the fruits of our labor. Thank y'all for watching. See y'all on July 10th.